A police cruiser screeched to a halt outside a $10 million estate. The officer rested his hand on his holster, cornering a black mother on her own driveway. He thought he was asserting his authority. He had no idea the governor of the state was watching from the living room window. The afternoon sun was relentless, beating down on the manicured lawns of Windsor Hills, an ultra-exclusive enclave in Connecticut, where old money hid behind towering iron gates and new money desperately tried to fit in. Serena Langford didn't belong to either category. She was a self-made woman, the founder and CEO of a global cybersecurity firm. She had bought the sprawling, ivy-draped Tudor mansion at the end of Elmwood Drive, paying in cash. It was supposed to be her sanctuary, a quiet place to raise her young daughter, Arya, away from the noise of the city. But on this particular afternoon, that sanctuary was about to be violated. Serena had stepped outside to check the mail. She was dressed down for the day in a faded Yale sweatshirt, black yoga pants, and a pair of worn-out sneakers. She was expecting a highly confidential package containing final contracts for a massive state infrastructure project. Her mind was a million miles away, calculating risk assessments and encryption protocols, when she heard the slow, deliberate crunch of heavy tires on the gravel near her front gate. She looked up to see a local police cruiser idling just outside her property line. At first, Serena didn't think much of it. The local precinct regularly patrolled Windsor Hills, but the cruiser didn't pass by. Instead, it shifted into park. The driver's side door opened and out stepped Officer Blake Hensley. He was a broad-shouldered man wearing dark aviator sunglasses that hid his eyes. His uniform was pressed so sharply it looked like it could cut glass. He had a reputation in the affluent suburbs, a man who liked to remind everyone who was supposedly keeping them safe. Hensley didn't approach the gate with a polite nod. He swaggered toward it, his thumbs tucked into his utility belt right next to his sidearm. "Excuse me," Hensley called out, his voice sharp and uncomfortably loud, shattering the quiet suburban afternoon. "Can I help you with something?" Serena paused, a stack of envelopes in her hand. She raised an eyebrow. "No, officer, I don't need any help." "Have a good afternoon." She turned on her heel to walk back up the long, sweeping cobblestone driveway toward her front door. "Hey, I didn't say you could walk away," Hensley barked, his tone instantly shifting from mildly condescending to openly hostile. Serena stopped. A cold knot formed in her stomach. She had spent her entire life navigating boardrooms filled with men who underestimated her. But this was different. This was visceral. She turned slowly, her posture straight and commanding. "Excuse me?" Hensley stepped up to the wrought iron gate. "I asked you a question. What are you doing here? This is private property." "I am fully aware that it is private property," Serena said, keeping her voice even and calm. She knew the rules of this twisted game. Any spike in her volume, any sudden movement would be weaponized against her. "I'm getting the mail." Hensley let out a short, humorless laugh. He looked her up and down, taking in the faded sweatshirt and the lack of makeup. "Right, getting the mail. Look, lady, the owners of this house aren't home. So, unless you're the cleaning staff and you're stealing their mail, I suggest you step away from the gate and come out here so we can have a little chat." Serena stared at him. The sheer audacity of the assumption hung in the air like thick humidity. "The owners of this house are home, officer," she said, glancing at his badge. "Hensley, because I am the owner." Hensley scoffed, leaning against the iron bars. "Sure you are, and I'm the King of England. I know the people who live in this neighborhood. I've patrolled Windsor Hills for years. I don't know you." "That sounds like a failure of your observational skills, not my problem," Serena replied cleanly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a very important meeting going on inside my home and you are interrupting my schedule." She turned away again, taking 3 steps toward her massive oak front door. "Stop right there," Hensley bellowed. The sound of a heavy metal latch clicking echoed through the yard. Serena looked over her shoulder. Hensley had reached over the low side of the pedestrian gate, flipped the internal latch, and was now pushing his way onto her property. He was officially trespassing on the estate of one of the wealthiest women in the state, driven by nothing but his own prejudiced assumptions. The dynamic had shifted. It was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a threat. Hensley marched up the cobblestones, closing the distance between them. Serena instinctively took a half step back, creating a defensive buffer, but she refused to retreat further. Her heart was beginning to hammer against her ribs, but her face remained an unreadable mask of absolute authority. "I gave you a lawful order to stop," Hensley said, his voice dropping to a menacing gravel. He stopped about 4 feet away from her, towering over her frame. His hand was resting firmly on the butt of his taser now. "You don't give orders on my property without a warrant or probable cause," Serena said, her voice icy. "You are trespassing. I suggest you turn around and walk back to your vehicle." "I have probable cause," Hensley sneered. Arthur Penhaligon over on the HOA board warned us about porch pirates and casing crews hitting these estates. Now I see an unidentified individual grabbing mail from a $10 million house claiming she owns it. I need to see some ID right now. My identification is inside my home, Serena said, where I am going. You aren't going anywhere until I verify who you are, Hensley snapped. You're detained. Detained? Serena's eyes narrowed. On my own driveway? If you don't comply, you're going to be in handcuffs, Hensley warned, taking another step forward, invading her personal space. The scent of cheap cologne and stale coffee washed over her. Down the street, the sound of a dog barking broke the tension. Serena glanced past Hensley to see Marjorie Ellsworth, a notorious neighborhood gossip, walking her golden retriever. Marjorie had stopped dead in her tracks on the sidewalk. She pulled out her smartphone, her eyes wide, and started recording the interaction. Hensley noticed the audience. Instead of de-escalating, the presence of an onlooker seemed to inflate his ego. He needed to assert his dominance to prove to the wealthy residents of Windsor Hills that he was the apex predator protecting their pristine bubble. Last chance, lady, Hensley said, unclipping the handcuffs from his belt. The metallic jingle sent a shiver down Serena's spine. Her daughter, Arya, was inside the house. If things went wrong, if this man decided to use force, Arya would be sitting in the living room, completely unaware that her mother was being assaulted just 50 feet away. But Serena Langford was not a woman who backed down. She had negotiated with ruthless foreign tycoons and navigated hostile corporate takeovers. A bully with a badge was just another man trying to leverage power he didn't truly possess. Officer Hensley, Serena said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, vibrating with a dangerous intensity. I bought this estate from the Harrison family. The deed is registered under Langford Holdings. If you call dispatch and run this address, they will tell you exactly who I am. If you take one more step toward me with those cuffs, I will not only ensure you lose your badge, but I will personally bankrupt you and the precinct that trained you. Hensley's face flushed a deep, angry red. His pride was wounded, and in his line of work, a wounded ego often led to catastrophic mistakes. You think you can threaten a police officer? He spat. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest for resisting and suspected burglary. I am standing still on my own property, Serena fired back, her voice finally rising, ringing out across the manicured lawns. Turn around! Hensley lunged forward, grabbing Serena's left wrist violently. The sudden physical contact shocked her. He wrenched her arm, trying to force it behind her back. Serena gasped, planting her feet, using her body weight to resist the pull. Let go of me, she demanded. Stop resisting, Hensley yelled, the classic phrase used to justify whatever violence was about to follow. Marjorie Ellsworth was still filming from the sidewalk, her hand covering her mouth in shock. Hensley yanked Serena's arm harder, raising his other hand, holding the cold steel handcuffs, ready to clamp them down on her wrist. The injustice of it all burned in Serena's chest. The sheer humiliating reality that all her success, all her education, and all her wealth couldn't protect her from a man who looked at her and saw a criminal. But what Officer Hensley didn't know, what he couldn't possibly fathom as he tried to wrestle a black mother to the ground on her own driveway, was that Serena Langford wasn't just wealthy. She was powerful, and her very important meeting wasn't a conference call. Just as Hensley raised the cuffs, the heavy custom-built oak front door of the mansion swung wide open. Serena, a deep, commanding voice called out from the doorway. Is everything all right out here? The connection to the server just dropped and we were... The voice belonged to a tall man in a tailored charcoal suit. He had distinguished silver hair and an unmistakable authoritative presence. He stepped out onto the front portico holding a crystal glass of sparkling water, followed closely by two massive men in dark suits with earpieces, his state-appointed security detail. Officer Hensley froze. His grip on Serena's wrist loosened just enough for her to rip her arm away. Hensley's jaw practically hit the cobblestones. The blood drained from his face, leaving him pale and sweating in the afternoon sun. He recognized the man standing on the porch immediately. Every law enforcement officer in the state knew that face. His portrait hung in the lobby of Hensley's own precinct. It was Governor Elias Crow, and he was looking directly at Officer Hensley with an expression of absolute, unadulterated fury. The silence that fell over the sweeping cobblestone driveway was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. The only sound was a distant hum of a lawnmower and the frantic, shallow breathing of Officer Blake Hensley. Governor Elias Crow did not rush down the steps. He descended them with the slow, measured, and terrifying calm of a man who held the power to end careers with a single phone call. Beside him, his two executive protection agents moved with fluid, practiced precision. Lead Agent Kane Ellison, a former Navy SEAL with a jawline like an anvil, didn't even wait for a command. He moved in a swift diagonal line, placing his imposing frame directly between Officer Hensley and Serena Langford. Step back, officer. Hands away from your belt. Do it right now, Agent Ellison ordered. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the lethal authority of a man who was entirely prepared to use force. Hensley stumbled backward as if he had been physically struck. His hands shot up in the air, the handcuffs dangling uselessly from his right index finger, clinking softly against his knuckles. I, I, Hensley stammered, his eyes darting frantically from the imposing frame of Agent Ellison to the governor, and finally to the black woman he had just tried to manhandle. Serena stood her ground, her chest heaving slightly, her left hand massaging her right wrist where Hensley had grabbed her. She didn't look scared. She looked furious. "Governor Crow, sir, I can explain," Hensley choked out, his voice cracking, the arrogant swagger completely evaporated. "There have been reports. Arthur Penhaligon from the HOA, he warned us about casing crews. I saw an unidentified individual taking mail, and I was just conducting an investigatory stop." She refused to identify herself. Governor Crow stopped at the bottom of the steps, his face a mask of cold patrician disgust. He looked at Hensley's badge number, then at the trembling hands of the officer. "You were conducting an investigatory stop," Crow repeated, his voice laced with venomous quiet, "by violently attacking the homeowner on her own property, by attempting to place a private citizen in handcuffs without a shred of legal justification, simply because she doesn't fit your narrow, prejudiced profile of what wealth looks like in this state." "Sir, she wouldn't show ID," Hensley pleaded, desperate to cling to standard operating procedure, hoping the bureaucratic shield would save him. Serena stepped out from behind Agent Ellison, her dark eyes flashing with a dangerous intelligence. "I told you my ID was inside the house, Officer Hensley, the house you were trying to prevent me from entering, the house I own." Crow turned his gaze to Serena, his expression softening instantly. "Serena, are you hurt?" "I am fine, Elias," she said smoothly, though the adrenaline was still coursing through her veins. "But I believe we are going to have to add a new addendum to our contract. It appears the rot in the local precincts is far deeper than the initial data suggested." Hensley looked between the two of them, a fresh wave of nausea washing over him. "Contract?" This was the twist that Officer Blake Hensley could never have seen coming. Serena Langford was not just a successful tech CEO. Her company, Langford Holdings, had just secured a massive, highly classified contract with the governor's office to overhaul the state's law enforcement cybersecurity infrastructure. For some time, Serena's team had been quietly auditing the data of local police departments, tracking everything from misappropriated funds to racially biased stop and frisk patterns. They had been looking at digital communications, dispatch logs, and body camera metadata. And Hensley's precinct, the prestigious 44th District of Windsor Hills, was the worst offender in the entire state. "Officer," Serena said, her voice dripping with absolute authority, "do you know what the governor and I were reviewing on my monitors right before you decided to assault me?" Hensley swallowed hard, shaking his head. He looked like a cornered animal. "We were looking at you," Serena said softly. The words hit Hensley like a physical blow. "Not you, specifically, though your name is all over the reports. We were looking at the 44th District. We were tracking the GPS metadata of your cruisers. We were analyzing the staggering discrepancy in your traffic stops and detainments." She took a step closer, leaving the safety of Agent Ellison's shadow. She wanted Hensley to look her in the eye. "We were looking at how your precinct creates a hostile environment for minorities in affluent neighborhoods, using vague complaints from HOA board members like Arthur Penhaligon to justify civil rights violations. You didn't just assault a citizen today, Officer Hensley. You assaulted the very woman who was hired to audit your department's corruption." Hensley's face went completely slack. The realization of what he had done, who he had done it to, crashed over him like a tidal wave. He hadn't just messed up, he had committed a career-ending atrocity in front of the highest executive officer in the state. "Agent Ellison," Governor Crow said sharply, never taking his eyes off Hensley, "call Captain Theo Raines at the 44th. Tell him I want him on this driveway immediately. If he is late, I will relieve him of his command before he parks his car." "Yes, sir," Agent Ellison replied, already tapping an earpiece. "And Officer Hensley," Crow added, his tone finalizing the death of the man's career, "I highly suggest you do not move a single muscle until your captain arrives to strip you of that badge." A short while later, a black unmarked SUV tore down Elmwood Drive. Its hidden sirens wailed briefly before being cut off as it swerved into Serena's driveway. The tires screeched against the cobblestones, halting just feet from where Hensley was standing in rigid, terrified silence. Captain Theo Raines threw open the door. He was a veteran cop, a man who had built a career on smoothing over the rough edges of his officers. But as he stepped out of the SUV and saw Governor Elias Crow standing on the portico flanked by state security with a furious Serena Langford at his side, Raines knew there was no smoothing this over. "Governor," Raines said breathlessly, practically jogging up the driveway. He shot a venomous glare at Hensley, who was sweating profusely in the afternoon sun. "Sir, I got the call from your detail. I don't know what happened here, but I assure you it is a terrible misunderstanding. It is not a misunderstanding, Captain Rains, Serena interrupted, her voice ringing out like a bell. It is a statistical certainty. Rains blinked, looking at the black woman in the faded Yale sweatshirt. He didn't know her face, but he recognized the tone of someone who held all the cards. Ma'am, I am incredibly sorry for whatever my officer did. Blake is a good cop. He just gets overzealous about property protection. Stop talking, Theo, Governor Crow commanded. You are embarrassing yourself and you are insulting Miss Langford. Serena, please enlighten the captain as to why we were meeting today. Serena crossed her arms. Captain Rains, my name is Serena Langford. I am the CEO of Langford Holdings. You might recognize the name from the external audit notices your precinct received recently. Rains's face dropped. The external audit, the one that had the entire union in an uproar because it demanded full access to their encrypted dispatch and patrol logs. For some time, my firm has run a deep dive data analysis on the 44th District, Serena explained, her voice cold and clinical. She was in her element now, dismantling them with facts, not emotion. We utilized machine learning algorithms to map the patrol routes, detainment records, and escalation reports of your officers. We wanted to see if the complaints of racial profiling in Windsor Hills were isolated incidents or systemic policy. Serena paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the driveway. Down the street, Marjorie Ellsworth was still standing on the sidewalk, her phone held high, recording every single word. I want you to look at the reality of your leadership, Captain, Serena said. Data comparison, the 44th District versus state averages over an extended period. The audit's data revealed staggering discrepancies between the 44th District and comparable districts across the state. Under Rains's command, minority drivers constituted 68% of all traffic stops compared to a 14% state average. Non-felony use of force incidents skyrocketed to 112 cases, dwarfing the average of 23. Furthermore, officers logged 405 suspicious person detentions, 89% involving minorities, drastically exceeding the norm of 60. Ultimately, these aggressive pretextual tactics proved entirely ineffective, yielding a dismal 0.02% success rate in solving actual property crimes. Note, data extracted directly from encrypted precinct logs via Langford Holdings cyber audit. Rains stared at Serena, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Hearing the data spoken aloud, contextualized by the undeniable reality of his officer standing there, having just assaulted the woman who compiled it, left him entirely defenseless. The data is irrefutable, Captain, Serena continued. Your officers do not protect this community. They occupy it. They harass minorities under the guise of neighborhood watch policies. Officer Hensley here didn't stop me because he thought I was a male thief. He stopped me because he saw a black woman in sweatpants in a wealthy neighborhood, and his training, under your command, told him I was a target. Ma'am, I swear to you, we do not train our officers to... Rains started, desperate to save his own pension. Save it for the Department of Justice, Captain, Governor Crow interrupted, stepping forward. The political fury radiated off him. Because of Ms. Langford's findings, and because of what I just witnessed with my own two eyes, the state is taking immediate action. Crow looked at Rains, listing the consequences with devastating precision. Immediate suspension. Officer Hensley is suspended without pay, effective immediately, pending a criminal investigation for assault and civil rights violations. Command reassignment. Captain Rains, you are relieved of your command of the 44th District pending a full state inquiry into your leadership and training protocols. State takeover. The state police will assume administrative control over the 44th District's dispatch and patrol routing until the DOJ audit is complete. Public release. The data compiled by Langford Holdings will be unsealed and released to the public and the press shortly. Yomi. Rains looked like he was going to be sick. He turned to Hensley, his eyes filled with a furious, helpless rage. Give me your badge and your weapon, Blake, right now. Hensley's hands were shaking so badly he could barely unclip his holster. He handed over his firearm and his gold shield to his captain, stripping away his entire identity in the middle of a driveway he had tried to unlawfully control just moments earlier. Without a word, Rains pointed to the unmarked SUV. Hensley, head hung low, devoid of any of his previous swagger, shuffled toward the vehicle and climbed into the back seat. Governor, Rains said, his voice hollow. Ms. Langford, I have no words. Then I suggest you leave in silence, Captain, Serena said. Rains gave a stiff nod, turned on his heel, and walked back to his vehicle. He drove away, taking the disgraced Officer Hensley with him, leaving the pristine quiet of Windsor Hills to settle back over the estate. Serena watched the SUV disappear around the bend of Elmwood Drive. The adrenaline was finally beginning to crash, leaving a cold ache in her wrist and a profound exhaustion in her bones. She turned toward the street. Marjorie Ellsworth immediately lowered her phone, looking slightly terrified but utterly mesmerized, before giving Serena a hesitant, respectful nod and hurrying away with her golden retriever. "Are you absolutely certain you're all right, Serena?" Governor Crowe asked gently, his security detail falling back a few paces to give them privacy. Serena took a deep breath, looking at the sprawling ivy on her beautiful Tudor mansion. "I am, Elias, but it terrifies me to think about what would have happened if you hadn't been standing in that doorway. What happens to the women who don't have the governor in their living room? What happens to the women who don't have the data to fight back?" "We change it," Crowe said firmly. "That's why I hired you. You just gave me the ammunition I need to tear this corrupt system down and rebuild it." Just then, the heavy front door creaked open a little wider. A small, sleepy voice drifted out from the grand foyer. "Mommy?" Serena turned. Her young daughter, Arya, stood in the doorway wearing pink pajamas and rubbing her eyes. She was holding a tablet, completely oblivious to the chaos, the threats, and the systemic reckoning that had just taken place in the cobblestones outside. The Wi-Fi went down again. "Is Mr. Elias fixing it?" A genuine, radiant smile broke across Serena's face, washing away the cold, corporate armor she had worn to dismantle Hensley. She walked up the steps, bypassing the governor and the security agents, and scooped her daughter up into her arms, burying her face in Arya's hair. "Yes, baby," Serena whispered, holding her daughter incredibly tight, standing fiercely on the threshold of the home she had fought for. "Mr. Elias and I are fixing it. We're fixing a lot of things today." What an absolutely gripping showdown of power, privilege, and justice. Serena Langford proved that true power isn't about carrying a badge. It's about knowing your worth, having the facts, and never backing down from intimidation. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment where someone drastically underestimated the wrong person? We want to hear your stories. Drop your experiences in the comments below. Hit that like button if you loved Serena's epic comeback. Share this video to spread the message and subscribe for more incredible true stories.